Okay, so we'll just get started. I know Rogers is having a bit of an outage, and I'm alternating between my phone as a hotspot and the the Rogers plan. So we'll get started. One of the things, so we're talking a bit about ethical situations, and over the last couple of days, one that came to mind would be, say, in California, their government's been pretty proactive about um, shutting things down, about keeping social distancing, and they've announced that their universities will be shut down in the fall. They might be continuing the workplace shutdown for many more months. Uh, these guidelines for safety, for shutting things down, for social distancing, it's not clear if they're laws. Like, if somebody were to challenge the government in court, we haven't ever had this before, so we're not sure what could happen. But so one of the companies would be Twitter, and they've announced that, hey, even after this is over, you can work at home forever. You can, we're going to try and have people working from home. Maybe it'll save on commute, maybe it'll save on the amount of office space we're renting, but they're just saying, hey, for the rest of the year and even beyond 2020, you can work from home. And the other uh, person, the other side of the coin would be Tesla, which has been trying to reopen their plant sooner than everyone else. And they're in an area where there's supposed to be a shutdown. So it's like they're being told, no, you can't open just yet. Elon Musk wants to reopen. Donald Trump's saying Elon Musk should reopen. And the ethics would be, what would those two companies do? Like, who's right? Like, is it Elon Musk for wanting to get back to work as soon as possible at a risk of safety? Or is it something like, well, no, actually Twitter is right in this case, because they're being flexible, they're considering everyone, um, and they're both companies in California. I understand that Tesla is physically manufacturing a good and Twitter is a service, so it's a slight change, but it's like they're two big companies. They're in the tech, they're tech companies, and they came to two different solutions about how to deal with this. And that's kind of an idea of the ethical, like an ethical dilemma. It's possible for two different companies or two different people to have different outcomes. So we'll go through again maybe what I was trying to show a bit last class, and then do the Kahoot at the end. Just see who's sort of remembers the most from the class, and um, I was having some trouble with my Prezi last week, and I'm still having some trouble with my network, so I won't go full screen. I'll keep it a little slow. I guess a philosophy of 20th century business is that if everyone's trying to make a profit, um, then they'll all do the best decision. They'll all make the optimum decision because they want to stay in business the longest. They want to have the most customers. So people will behave the best way. I don't know. Has anyone seen the movie Wall Street? I'm just gonna open up the chat window. Has anyone seen this? It's from the 80s. They made a sequel called Money Never Sleeps. Michael Douglas plays this character, Gordon Gekko. And you might not have, if you do like business, it's and you have some extra time. The film's called Wall Street. It's from the 80s. Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen are in it. And Gordon Gekko's like this stereotypical 1980s, um, greedy. He takes over companies. He has a fancy lifestyle. He just wants to take over the company and make a profit. And at the end, maybe that wasn't the best thing to do. Charlie Sheen's new to business, new to Wall Street. He has to decide what he wants to do. It's a pretty famous business film. It kind of portrays how business was in the 80s. There was a certain, you, there were people like Donald Trump, like, um, these on Wall Street, who were very, very, like they were celebrities because they were in business. Anyways, he has a quote. Go back to sharing my screen. And this is kind of the old school version of ethics. It's like, greed, for the lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all its forms, greed for life, money, for love, for knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind. And if you want to go through those slides from Monday's class, I posted the monologue. And so the old view would be, yeah, greed would make a better product because you'd make the best product you could to stay in business. You'd lower costs for the customer because you wanted to make more profit. But we sometimes find that it doesn't always lead to the optimal outcome. Sometimes, there's been some cases where companies have, shortchanged their consumers, where companies have falsified records. There was a case where, um, you know, Volkswagen, they're trying to make an environmentally sound car, but they falsified the testing records and the emission tests. So the car, was actually a big polluter. But because they wanted to create a car to target the, environmentally conscious consumer, they falsified the record. So it's not always, it's, I don't want to say, hey, you always have to share all your profits or you can't make profits, but just, some might argue there's a perspective that being corporately, socially responsible actually could lead to better profits down the road. So, you know, one hand, if businesses do well, they employ people, they pay taxes, they keep the community going. On the other hand, if they pursue profits only, they might take advantage of others. We had a stock market lesson in the fall. People might falsify their records and people invest in the company not knowing the real story. There could be some environmental damage. There could be some defective products. Has anyone had, a product that they found to be defective, something that they really, bought, and then it turned out it wasn't what was advertised? Before I switched to Apple devices, I had a couple of Samsung devices that failed, under, a bit of water. And their attitude about it really turned me off Samsung products. So that's that's one of the reasons that I switched to Apple, was just their customer service, and the fact they wouldn't take responsibility really annoyed me as a customer. Anyone else have a defective product that they ran into, and how that made them feel? No, usually someone's like, oh, my cell phone charger doesn't work or broke after the wire got twisted. Um, Anyways, just be aware, of that. We'll move on. So if we're in business, there's all these people that you have to have responsibilities for. So there's other owners of the company, the shareholders. So Elon Musk at Tesla, he's trying to keep the Tesla shareholders happy. But then he also has responsibilities to the workers. And if he doesn't reopen properly, um, and they get sick, he hasn't done that responsibility. Whereas Twitter, they're valuing, they've put their workers a little higher because they're not making them come into the office. They're valuing the community a little more because They're not making people come in and possibly people could get ill at work. They're letting them work from home as long as they need to. So, the governments, the environment, laws, sometimes business is about striking the best balance between all of these situations. If you're solely for the owners and you're solely like Gordon Gekko for profit, you might be missing, you might be harming your workers. You might be harming the customers somehow. So I think we um, mentioned this before, but I'll just reread it again. Just uh, ethical behavior, conduct that conforms to ethics, our own beliefs and standards about what's right and good. And I think we're seeing that a lot these days. You see some companies are reopening with safety precautions or curbside pickup. Some are staying closed because they don't think they can do it. Other ones in the US have even less safety precautions. So you're seeing all these different business owners taking safety differently. Values, again, it's what helps us make decisions. As a teacher, some of the values that sort of would guide my decision would be sort of self-actualization, that everyone can do their best. I think I kind of believe a bit in grinding as well. So sometimes if I see that someone's not working as hard, I might be more critical. If I see someone is trying hard, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. So those are a couple of values that inform my teaching. You, as a person, have some values. Your family has some values. They're all a little different. And then morals are like rules. Hey, treat others like you'd like to be treated. Be a good neighbor. Whatever your morals are. Okay. So, if you wanted to watch this is a short clip, and again, I'm having some trouble with my network, and I wouldn't show it anyways because we're only here for half an hour. Enron, Enron, was a big company around 2000, 2001, and they lost it all. They were doing things like falsifying records. They made up this short clip in this presentation is about these guys. They're trading natural gas, and they make up a buyer and they make up the name My Ass as like M, and then the last name YASS as the name of the person who was buying the gas from them. But it really was just a made up transaction. They did all these annual reports that explained what they did each year, but they were huge, like 0.10 font, like big appendices at the back. It was very, very hard for the average person to understand them. They do things like they called it rank and yank. So at the end of each year, the bottom 20% of people would be fired. And some companies do that, like Netflix also has that type of a philosophy. But the doubt, like, what if you were, at the borderline? Would you act inappropriately to make sure you weren't fired? What would you do to make sure you weren't in that bottom 20%? And it turned out some people were making some questionable transactions. They knew their numbers weren't up to par, so they made up their numbers, and that just led to the company, totally going bankrupt. They even had one thing where the executives had their own private floor, their own escalator, like they had special privileges, and they never talked to the rest of the employees, and that led to a bit of a kind of, hey, I want to be up there on the executive floor. I'll do whatever it takes to get there. And what people were doing wasn't necessarily best for the long-term health of the business. A lot of pension funds lost money. A lot of the average investors lost money. So ethical dilemmas is kind of a situation where there's a difficult choice. You want to consider all sides of the issue. So if Doug Ford, he's doing his press conference on Thursday, he's going to announce some type of steps for reopening the economy. Each company is going to have to go through it like, hey, Can we do these recommendations? Is it going to be safe to open? Should we modify our business? You know, like like maybe if someone's like a golf, you know, a golf course, they're like, all right, that's going to be easy enough to keep people separate. But something like a hair salon or a barber shop, they might have difficulty. What should a restaurant do? Should they do takeout only? Should they do, you know, partial seating? You know, these are all these things you're going to see restaurants doing. And, you know, you always want to look through all the alternatives, look at what's good, what's bad, make a decision, and then think about, is this decision going to last? Like in 2 years, what's Elon Musk going to look like for reopening his plant? Will he look like a guy who was greedy and a couple of people died and many people got sick? Or will it be like, hey, he was the first to see that things were getting better, and he took enough precautions that he helped, you know, get the economy started again? That'd be kind of a bit of a, you know, a question. You know, we don't know just yet whether he's right or wrong. So some of the things that might happen in business, you know, a whistleblower, that's, you might have heard that also in politics. That's when someone sees something's going wrong and they tell their boss, or they tell the media, or they tell the government that, hey, I've noticed that this company is dumping chemicals into the river. And they'd be a whistleblower. Those people are supposed to be protected, but you might have noticed in Donald Trump's White House that doesn't always happen. You know, labor standards, like, is it too hot? Is it the hours, are they too long? Are people being treated fairly? Are people, you know, receiving the right wage for their overtime? Chipotle was criticized for not paying overtime for their staff a few years ago. You know, a conflict of interest when someone has, you know, two different you know, if I'm working for Enron, my one interest is staying hired and keeping in my job, so I might falsify records so that I look good, but that might not, you know, help the company. I might be in a position where, you know, I'm being pulled in two different directions. uh, some of these are pretty clear. Insider trading, that's when um, you work for a company and you know something's going to happen that the general public doesn't know. That's considered to be ethical violation. You know, harassment. I mentioned Twitter because they're letting people work from home, but they're also known for having a lot of harassment in their workplace. So it's not like one company is the best ethical company and one company is the worst. It can be, you know, different types of these areas can add up. It can, you know, be affected. Have some terms there. Does anyone have? I'm just going to open up the chat window. Does anyone? I'm going to make sure I have my chat window open so I can see your questions. Does anyone have any questions about some of these terms? Does anyone like that? Where's my chat window? There it is. So if you wanted to just type them in the chat, any of the words you wanted me to go into in a little more detail. And and then if not, you know, send me a follow-up email. I have a little Kahoot, and if you don't remember it as much when we get to the Kahoot, then that's okay. And what are some of the solutions companies are doing? Well, a lot of companies are creating their own code of ethics. You know, they'll have an ethical policy, they'll have a privacy policy on their website, they might have like a values statement. The government of Ontario has employment standards. It's under the Ministry of Labor. You can see, like, hey, if you work 5 hours, you get a half-hour break, things like that. You know, they bring in companies to audit. Audit is just to do a thorough records check. You know, at City Hall, people have to be register as lobbyists so that we know who's lobbying our government officials. Fair trade, you know, coffee, for example, you know, as you've seen in class, I'm a big coffee user. Uh, one of the issues about coffee is there's a lot of small growers in equatorial areas of the world, and there's very, very few buyers. So the big buyers tend to drive down the prices, and it's hard for the farmers to make a living. So one solution is a fair trade coffee association sort of gets all the growers together to advocate for better conditions, better prices, so they can make more of a living. And then on the other hand, someone like Starbucks would say, hey, we're going to buy fair trade coffee. And they started off, their initial commitment to fair trade coffee was £1 million, and they've kind of grown that over the years. So the idea is if we go to Starbucks, we feel a bit better because the farmers are getting a better deal. You know, educating people about ethics, sometimes people just don't know. And then corporate social responsibility, you know, is a bit of a trend. You know, being responsible, making so. Uh, I've posted a few links here. Some of them would, you know, you don't have to read. They're just extra context. So, um, you know, like an example, um, what to do about the waste at, you know, a place like Tim Hortons or Starbucks? Should they have, you know, different straws? What about their cups, you know, that people just throw in the trash? Now, this was from last year. Obviously, now we're going to be back to single-use cups for a while because we're all worried about our health. But the idea of how is a coffee shop going to deal with the straws, the waste, the cups is sort of a corporate social responsibility issue. Somebody might say, hey, we're always going to have reusable straws and recycled napkins, and that's going to be something that separates us from the competition. Um, yeah, so this was just how people were feeling on about ethics. It's just, you know, what have they witnessed, like, you know, anti-competitive practices, lying. It's just a little survey that was in the newspaper about what type of behaviors people had witnessed while at work, just to give you an idea of what it's out there. But again, I'm having some trouble with it. You know, again, another example of I don't know if you remember this, you know, it's in 2013, but there was a building collapse in Bangladesh, and the Canadian company Joe Fresh, they were using the warehouse, the factory. It collapsed, and there was, you know, hundreds of people killed, and so they were accused of using sweatshop labor. And then they also had to deal with, in the media, all these Joe Fresh labels were in the building wreckage with you know, all the bodies and all the injuries, and you know, it was a bad look for them. They kind of had to deal with at the time, hey, is this why your products are so cheap? Because you're not looking after your workers. And you know, that just was one of the images, you know. And so they had to sort of say, okay, well, going forward, we're going to inspect our factories more, and we're going to take more of a role to make sure that we're on top of things. Yeah, so I have a little bit of a Kahoot. I know it's kind of, I would have done it in 2 classes if we were at school, but let's just dive into it and see what happens. And it's just going to um, go over some of the terms as a little reminder. And again, I want to value your time, so I'll just start at about 10:25. Um, And if you're not in, you'll just have to play along virtually. Okay, so 15 seconds. Okay. All right, let's get started. See what happens. So what were the terms from the class or that best fit this sentence? Okay, so these are, you know, ethics can be sort of moral principles, standards. Like your parents might have a standard, hey, you have to get 90, 85 in every class, but that's not necessarily moral. But anyways, we'll move on. So what kind of ethics would be based on moral principles that businesses and companies should follow? Yeah, just business ethics. Structured ethics. You'd see that in a philosophy course. I kind of made this question because we were talking about business ethics. We never really said corporate ethics. Sometimes you get, especially if you take the e-learning course, there's like these multiple choice tests where they're very, very particular about you using the right word. So I just threw that in there for, habits, kind of made up an answer that wasn't correct just to see. So what could be a set of guidelines for maintaining ethics in the workplace? Is it rules, etiquette? Yeah, again, it's code of ethics. So sometimes companies publish their code of ethics, but they don't follow it. And that can be a disconnect. If you just post it in the lobby or on the website, then but no one follows it. Sometimes even you can ask the employees, what do you think of your company's code of ethics? And it turns out they don't know. Like they honestly, like they couldn't answer a quiz about their own code of ethics. Factory where people work long hours with low pay, with unhealthy conditions is an assembly line, a smokehouse, a sweatshop, sweat room. Yeah, it's a sweatshop. That would be, are we getting fast fashion because people are working in a sweatshop? Okay, Adam, Ava, Jade. So this group sets and enforces work-related health and safety rules. I mentioned it in passing. It's the Ministry of Government Services, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Ethics. It's the Ministry of Labor. So if you're at a job and they ask you to do something you're not trained for, or there's a problem about the overtime or your wage or your hours, the Ministry of Labor is the go-to person. Some unethical business practices include, lying, treating customers badly, offering substandard merchandise. Yeah, it can be all these situations. It's not just one type of thing. It could be any problem. What happens when there's personal self-interest that is at odds with professional obligations? It's a conflict of interest, and that's that little cartoon. It's like the health inspector is being invited into the restaurant, and then he gets a big dinner to fake the health reviews. So that'd be a small conflict of interest. All right, got Ava and Simone there, 2/3 of the way through. Oh, I didn't say this. You'll have to figure it out. You'll have to guess. Attracting a consumer with a low price and encouraging them to buy an expensive item is known as illegal advertising, bait and switch. Okay. So, that sometimes you see that at like Boxing Day or Black Friday. They have a limited number of super cheap items, and then once you're there, they say, "Oh, that's sold out, but would you want to buy this?" Or sometimes, at Best Buy, the salesperson would pressure you to, hey, well, this is okay, this is what's on sale, but what you really want is this TV here. And that can be putting pressure on the customers, and it can be a little unethical. The corporate social responsibility requires that businesses consider their impact on the environment, share price, sales, profits. Yeah, so most businesses, they only would be looking at profits and sales and share price, but CSR encourages, let's look at some of these non-economic issues. And those affected by an ethical situation, this is kind of related to this week's little project. Are they customers? Are they citizens? Are they clients? Are they stakeholders? Yeah, so a stakeholder is someone who's involved. If they have a connection, a financial connection to the company, they're a primary stakeholder. If they're just someone who's impacted by the business and they don't have financial ties to the company, they're a secondary stakeholder. Social responsibility is the duty to do what's best for the good of your bottom line, corporate culture, your organization, society. Yeah, the idea to let, if you could get some really cheap plastic straws, at the fast food place, but maybe something a little more expensive, that's biodegradable turns out to be better for the world as a whole. Okay, and then we have one last question. What can happen if a company treats its workers unfairly? Low morale, people leave the company, there's poor publicity. Yeah, all of those things that could happen. Okay, so we'll see who, Jasper, good job, good job. Jade and Eva. Okay, so good job for those three. And then, hey, if you noticed in the Kahoot that you didn't remember exactly one of the phrases, you can, I'll stick around for more questions. I know I rushed through this. And so, yeah, so hopefully you kind of understand a little bit, about these ethical terms. I know when I mentioned this to the grade 11 class, when we were talking about documentaries that they'd seen, everyone had seen the Fire Festival documentary. And so I just mentioned that as sort of a conflict of interest about how the people organizing the festival, were in conflict. So, here's a little short cartoon, that the doctor is telling the guy, try this, I just bought 100 shares in this company. If your doctor was saying that, you wouldn't feel good. You'd want the doctor to say, hey, this is the best medicine for what you're suffering from. They don't want you to say, hey, I just invested in this company, but that'd be an example of a conflict. And if you the Fire Festival, if you wanted to watch that documentary about how things can go horribly, horribly wrong, Firefest, they were supposed to be on this island, and once people agreed to travel to that island for the festival, the organizers of the festival had a sort of responsibility to make sure they were fed, that they were safe, that they got their money's worth. But they were using the money that was coming in to pay for social media for another app. They had two different companies going on. They had a festival and they had an app that was supposed to help people book entertainment, and they were taking the money from the festival and using it for the app, and as a result the festival was a big disaster. So these would be some examples of a conflict. It could be between personally you and your company, or it could be sometimes somebody has two different companies that they're trying to balance between, and we call those conflicts of interest because their interests are divided. So that's sort of today's class. I appreciate you, coming by, and thank you. And if you have any questions